Imagine your child tells you that your ex-spouse is hurting them, and the court system, due to a false accusation against you, not only prevents you from seeking help for your child, but barring you from seeing them entirely. You have to sit at home helpless in saving your child's life. Now, does this sound like a made-up scenario to you? Well, this is exactly what happened in today's story, and nobody, not teachers, not police, not even CPS, took this little girl's cries for help seriously. We always hear people say that the worst thing about a child victim is that they can't properly tell anyone what's going on, but the sad reality is that even when they speak up, too many times those that are mandated to care about the life of a child, for whatever reason, turn them away.
Aniya Marie Day Garrett was born on September 2nd, 2013 in Euclid, Ohio, to parents Sierra Day and Michael Garrett. Her parents never married and separated before Aniya turned 2. In turn, Sierra gained full custody of Aniya while Michael did everything he could to remain part of her life. Growing up, Aniya was described as energetic and outgoing. She loved to sing and dance, bringing laughter to everyone who watched her. Her favorite color was pink. But behind her happiness lay a fractured family dynamic that would set the stage for the challenges she'd face.
As Aniya grew older, cracks began to form in her once sparkling world, and by 2016, concerns relating to her physical well-being started to surface. During his visitation time with his daughter, Michael noticed injuries that Sierra often downplayed or dismissed entirely. For example, he recalled instances where Aniya had visible bruises on her chest and back. Sierra explained these injuries away as accidents or minor mishaps, but Michael grew increasingly uneasy. Before long, arguments between the two parents reached an all-time high, ultimately prompting Sierra to file a restraining order against her ex. The court order alleged that Michael was harassing Sierra and overstepping in his limited role as a parent. While Michael fought very hard to gain full custody, he was effectively barred from contacting Sierra directly or visiting Aniya without a neutral third party present, such as a social worker or a designated court monitor.
Sierra started isolating herself and refused to allow her children to visit with any of their loved ones. Rather than accept help from Aniya's father or extended family, Sierra chose to enroll her daughter in daycare. Shortly after her arrival at the Harbor Crest Daycare in Euclid, workers began documenting new injuries observed on Aniya's body that seemed to appear daily. Abrasions, burns, and even black eyes were ultimately detailed in a total of 18 observation reports filed by staff, which were in turn filed to their supervisors. In one of the reports, a daycare worker noted that Sierra frequently dismissed the concerns for her child, claiming that Aniya was a liar. In May of 2017, Aniya arrived at daycare with bumps on her head and a scrape on her face. That day, she informed a caretaker, and I quote, "Mommy pushed me down the steps." Sierra assured the caretaker that her daughter had simply fallen at a park. Days later, Aniya showed up at daycare, this time complaining that she had a headache. Upon examination, blisters were found on her scalp and dried blood inside of her ear. Sierra insisted that this was just an allergic reaction to a Johnson & Johnson baby wash that she'd been using. In the same breath, she proceeded to change her story, claiming that these particular injuries may have been caused by Aniya's braid that had been wound too tight. When Aniya was pulled aside, her story was much different than her mother's, insisting that, and I quote, "Mommy hit me. Mommy hurt me." As a result, the owner of the daycare facility notified the police, and Aniya was transported to the hospital for physical evaluation. Despite the multiple reports and medical treatment, Aniya was subsequently released back to her mother.
Concerns for the little girl only grew when Sierra began dating a man named Deontay Lewis in July of 2017. While Deontay had no previous criminal record, the 26-year-old who worked as a local security guard was the furthest thing from a protector and was incapable of keeping anyone safe, let alone Aniya. Family members described Deontay as controlling, and when he entered the picture, the family dynamic took a turn for the worse. While the child's biological father had been made aware of the reports, he also witnessed the violence firsthand. During a visit to the home in September of 2017, Michael discovered bruises on Aniya's chest and back. On a separate occasion, Michael took notice of a rotting tooth Aniya had been suffering with that had gone untreated. Michael subsequently photographed these injuries and filed his own report with the Cleveland police. Despite Michael's multiple petitions to the courts, expressing fears for his daughter's safety, law enforcement failed to take appropriate action, allowing the violence to continue unchecked.
A few months later, in December of 2017, the Cuyahoga County Department of Children and Family Services received an emergency referral regarding allegations of violence and neglect involving Aniya. When a social worker visited Sierra's apartment, she observed more bruises and burns on Aniya's body, but for some reason, deemed the child's living conditions as up to par after confirming functional utilities, food supplies, and requirements of basic necessities had been met. While law enforcement assured Aniya's father they were looking into the matter, the investigation did not escalate any further. Surely recognizing that she was under the distorted microscope of law enforcement, Sierra Day made the decision to transfer Aniya from Harbor Crest to a new daycare, one where she herself was employed. This was a preschool in Euclid called Get Ready, Set, Grow.
By the time Aniya arrived at her new preschool, things had gotten much worse. Staff noticed that she appeared malnourished, sickly, and emotionally withdrawn. When confronted by her coworkers' concern that her daughter's weight was low, Sierra assured them that she was fine and had always been just a skinny child. Despite Aniya's condition that was worsening by the day, Sierra's mere presence as a teacher at Get Ready, Set, Grow facilitated an environment where she was able to better disguise the violence. Aniya's transition out of Harbor Crest and into her mother's workplace essentially shielded caregivers from properly documenting her daughter's injuries. It became a place where supervision was even more minimal. That fact was ultimately proven in January of 2018, when Cleveland PD's investigation into Sierra Day was closed altogether. The case against her was somehow deemed unsubstantiated. Despite hospital visits, photographic evidence, witness accounts, and even statements from Aniya herself, the 4-year-old was allowed to remain in a dangerous environment. Behind the closed doors at her mother's apartment, what happened over the next few weeks went ignored until it was far too late. The social worker who had visited the home had scheduled a follow-up meeting for March 9th, 2018, but Sierra postponed it to March 12th. And tragically for Aniya, that day never came.
On March 11th, 2018, Deontay Lewis called 911 to report that Aniya had fallen from the toilet and was having trouble breathing. After nearly 4 minutes, Sierra took the phone, informing the operator that she had put her hand to Aniya's nose and that there was no air coming out. When the dispatcher ordered Sierra to administer CPR, there was no indication that either of the two adults followed her instructions. The dispatcher also noted how both Deontay and Sierra remained abnormally calm for the duration of the call. When paramedics arrived, they immediately noticed the heavy stench of bleach. In addition, Aniya's mattress had been stripped of its bedding aside from one small fleece blanket and smelled strongly of urine. Police also found court papers regarding Michael Garrett's custody battle torn up and thrown in the trash. Authorities also noticed a scarcity of food in the home, aside from 2 half-eaten Chipotle bowls discovered in the microwave. But the worst discovery is when 4-year-old Aniya was found, dressed in winter clothing, lying on the floor underneath an air conditioner. It was a cold day in March, and the presence of a running air conditioner struck the first responders as bizarre. It appeared evident that Sierra and Deontay had tried to disguise the smell of human decay by keeping the child's body cool. In addition, Aniya was found nowhere near the toilet Deontay and Sierra initially reported her falling from. Rigor mortis had already set in, indicating that she had been dead for several hours. Her lips were cracked and her face was pale, showing clear signs of prolonged neglect. She was severely emaciated, with her small body resembling that of a skeleton with her vertebrae and hip bones protruding from her small winter coat. Aniya's face also bore a deep, dark bruise that had caused one eye to swell shut. A laceration above the same eye was also visible. Additional bruises, cuts, and burns were witnessed across her entire body, along with areas of her skin that had begun to droop and fall from her tiny frame due to severe loss of fat and muscle tissue. Aniya's knees and lower legs showed signs of bed sores as well, indicated that she had been confined to one position for extended periods. When questioned by police at home, the couple claimed that Aniya had fallen off the toilet that morning and hit her head, rendering her unconscious. Sierra also noted that Aniya hadn't eaten since the previous Thursday, roughly 4 days before, after becoming ill from a meal at a local Red Lobster. However, what Sierra's brother later told police suggested that Aniya had gone without food for much longer. In February of 2018, Sierra's brother, Isaiah Day, visited the apartment only to find Aniya lying immobile on a bed. When he asked if she was okay, Sierra casually replied, "Yeah," completely dismissing her daughter's alarming condition. She went on to nonchalantly explain to her brother that Aniya hadn't been eating much, a vast understatement given the fact that Aniya had allegedly already lost all function of her legs. Despite a clear sense of urgency, Isaiah failed to notify the police and only revealed this information when he was questioned following Aniya's death. Investigators also learned that on February 21st, Sierra contacted local authorities, not regarding her daughter, but to report her laptop stolen. When deputies arrived at the home, Deontay answered the door. Police never went inside, but had they, a starving Aniya more than likely would have been found.
Following these grim discoveries, Sierra and Deontay were both arrested. During her interrogation, Sierra admitted that Aniya began showing flu-like symptoms on March 8th and had been vomiting all day after the meal at Red Lobster. She went on to say that she and Deontay tried feeding her multiple items, including soup and Tylenol, but her symptoms persisted. Despite not being able to keep down a sip of ginger ale, Sierra confessed that she believed Aniya was faking an illness, even going as far as to say that her daughter, and I quote, scared herself to the point of causing her own death. After giving her daughter a bath, Sierra told detectives that Aniya said she was sleepy. Hours later, Sierra finally decided to call a 24-hour health hotline, but never once sought medical attention for her daughter, who was slowly dying inside her apartment. Throughout her interrogation, Sierra attempted to blame Deontay for her child's death, claiming he was responsible for feeding the child, not her, and contested the medical care Aniya desperately needed. Sierra also alleged that Deontay had beaten Aniya on several occasions and was known to use a belt during these instances. Following their respective police interviews, Sierra and Deontay were charged with murder, aggravated murder, felonious assault, permitting CA, endangering children, and tampering with evidence. Upon recovering CCTV footage from local businesses in the area, surveillance footage showed that night before Aniya's death, Sierra and Deontay were seen dining at a Chipotle restaurant where they proceeded to enjoy burrito bowls together. Later, the two were seen shopping at a nearby Walmart. Their 4-year-old daughter lay gravely ill at home. They were later witnessed purchasing snacks and other household items, including cleaning supplies, while Aniya lay dying.
An autopsy later performed by Cuyahoga County Chief Deputy Medical Examiner Dr. Joseph Fellow confirmed the harrowing details surrounding Aniya's death. The examination pointed toward evidence of prolonged neglect and severe injuries spanning weeks. It was determined that Aniya weighed just 26 pounds at the time of her death, placing her in the 3rd percentile for her age. The medical examiner was also able to determine that the bruise on the right side of Aniya's forehead was approximately 1 week old, and that the black eye had been sustained roughly 2 days before her death. Petechia was also found around her eyes, further evidence of her prolonged suffering before death. The autopsy also revealed a cerebral infarction caused by a subdural hematoma, consistent with blunt force trauma to the head. This hematoma had developed over weeks, leading to extensive brain damage and a stroke that affected the left side of her brain, which controls the right side of the body. This trauma resulted in paralysis, impaired speech, and a decline in motor function. Dr. Fellow also documented signs of starvation, noting that Aniya's body had begun to consume itself. Her stomach lining showed ulcers from prolonged acid exposure due to a lack of food. Her pancreas was inflamed, and her lungs exhibited signs of collapse. The cumulative findings led Dr. Fellow to rule her cause of death as cerebral infarction due to blunt impacts to the head, with malnutrition as a significant contributing factor. Her manner of death was immediately classified as homicide. Upon analyzing the suspect's cell phones, authorities recovered a sex tape of Sierra and Deontay that was recorded at 3:28 p.m. on March 10th, 2018, the day before Aniya's death. This was just one more disturbing detail, knowing that the 4-year-old was nearing her final moments, lying helplessly in the other room.
Justice for Aniya would finally come at trial when opening arguments began on February 28, 2019. The proceedings exposed the undeniable depth of the cruelty the little girl had endured, long before she was left to die inside her mother's apartment. During the trial, the defense attempted to suggest that Aniya's injuries were either accidental or caused by external factors. However, their explanations were contradicted by the overwhelming medical evidence, and a total of 37 testimonies from witnesses, including daycare workers, first responders, social workers, family members, and more. The paramedics on scene that fateful day took the stand, recounting Aniya's emaciated state to the jury. Additionally, the surveillance footage of Sierra and Deontay casually eating at local restaurants and shopping for bleach at Walmart were also presented in court. Those present in the courtroom noted that Sierra showed little emotion throughout the entirety of the trial, even when the graphic photos of Aniya's body were shown on the projector screen. This lack of visible remorse was cited by prosecutors as further evidence of both hers and her co-defendant's callousness. One of the most impactful moments at trial was the emotional testimony of Aniya's biological father, Michael Garrett. Michael graciously described his love for his daughter and his relentless but fruitless efforts to protect her. Michael also spoke about the last time he saw his daughter alive. During a supervised visit, he noticed how frail and withdrawn she was. Stark contrast to the bright and energetic little girl that he knew. He testified that Aniya's demeanor had changed drastically in her mother's custody, and even more so when Deontay came into her life. On the stand, Michael expressed his frustration with the state, the system solely responsible for protecting children, as well as the unwarranted restraining order Sierra had filed against him, which legally limited access to Aniya during a critical period where her life was clearly in danger.
In the end, both Sierra Day and Deontay Lewis were convicted on all charges. During sentencing, the judge described the actions of both defendants as inhumane and unfathomable, emphasizing that Aniya's death was entirely preventable. As a result of the court proceedings, 24-year-old Sierra Day received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, while 27-year-old Deontay Lewis was sentenced to life with the possibility of parole after 20 years.
Aniya's death forced the state of Ohio to confront its own negligence, and outrage turned to action as community members called for reform. Michael Garrett filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the Cuyahoga County Department of Children and Family Services, which alleged gross negligence and failure to protect Aniya despite repeated reports of violence and neglect. It detailed breakdowns in the system that allowed Aniya to remain in not one, but 2 state-regulated child care facilities. While the lawsuit sought financial compensation, more importantly, it aimed to bring attention to the urgent need for reform within CPS. Michael's legal team argued that had the state followed through on its duty to investigate and intervene, Aniya would still be alive today.
CPS found me! They found us all!
As a result of an external investigation, the internal disciplinary letters and failed investigative efforts by local law enforcement came into focus, highlighting the gross lapses in oversight and protocol. The letters specifically drew attention to the blatant ignorance of Aniya's caseworkers, who repeatedly failed to follow up on allegations of violence, perform thorough investigations, or document key findings in compliance with agency policies. Among the findings were the multiple reports from Harborcrest Daycare detailing visible injuries on Aniya that were dismissed without proper investigation. The little to no collaboration between caseworkers and other professionals such as police, medical personnel, and daycare staff to verify the consistency of the allegations. And finally, that supervisors failed to ensure their teams adhered to protocols for handling suspected CA cases. This failure ultimately cost Aniya her life. At the end of the investigation into the agency, multiple employees were disciplined while others were terminated. As a result, CPS was forced to implement significant policy changes aimed at preventing similar tragedies involving children in the future. Additionally, the Ohio Department of Job and Family Services took significant action against the 2 daycare centers connected to Aniya's death, causing both Harborcrest Childcare and Get Ready Set Grow Preschool to close their doors indefinitely. As for Aniya's father, Michael Garrett, He was awarded a total of $3 million in damages in June of 2020, a decision that underscored the state's accountability and failure to protect 4-year-old Aniya Day Garrett.
Aniya's life was commemorated with a deeply emotional farewell spanning 2 days. On Friday, March 16th, 2018, a viewing was held from noon until 7 p.m., allowing loved ones and members of the community to pay their respects. Her father, Michael Garrett, tearfully reflected on her joy and innocence, describing her as a light in this world whose story must never be forgotten. The following day, on Saturday, March 17th, Aniya's funeral took place at River of Life Ministries in Euclid, Ohio. Attendees watched as her tiny pink casket, adorned with a tiara, traveled through the streets of Euclid in a horse-drawn carriage. It was both a celebration of her short life and a heartbreaking reminder of her tragic death. Her funeral not only honored her memory, but also served as a call for accountability to protect other children. Deontay Lewis later appealed his conviction and life sentence, arguing that his trial was unfair and that the evidence presented did not support the jury's findings. However, in 2022, the Ohio Court of Appeals denied his appeal, and both his conviction and sentence were upheld.
It is beyond heart-wrenching to reflect on how Aniya Day Garrett, at only 4 years old, found the courage to speak up for herself repeatedly, bravely telling the adults in her life that she was in danger. From daycare workers to her father, she voiced the harm she experienced at home, pointing to her injuries and outwardly naming the source of her pain. But tragically, those cries for help were overlooked, ignored, or dismissed entirely, and the system set in place to protect her simply failed her. Often people highlight this one tragic fact involving child victims at the hands of their parents. That is that a child often cannot advocate for themselves or properly seek help. However, Aniya did everything in her power to advocate for herself. She knew she was in danger. She knew what her mother and her mother's boyfriend was doing to her was wrong. But as we've seen so many times, even when a child does try to seek help, many people do not take it seriously, especially those whose responsibility is to protect children in need. By the time anybody listened, it was too late. And the vibrant little girl who had fought so hard to be heard was left silenced forever. Aniya's story stands as a devastating reminder of the cost of inaction by the powers that be. Through the tireless efforts of her father and community advocates, Aniya's story continues to inspire change, a testament of hope that no child will ever suffer in silence again. However, if we've learned anything from the cases we cover, the likelihood of a similar history repeating itself is not only higher than any of us would care to admit, it is sadly inevitable.